So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your time. Apologies for this morning. But we decided to change things a little bit this morning because we actually have the privilege, not only was Dr. Dolf Roos able to come out from America, but another one of our partners and chairman of our group, Hennie, was actually down here buying land in your beautiful city because he's building hospitals here. And so for me, I wanted to start off today. I just want to set a prelude, and then we're actually going to get into a Q&A answer. And those of you who are asking about ShareMax, some of the risks and the safeties, we actually analyzed and were involved in looking into ShareMax for over 6 months. So we really can get into the details, and we'd love to have that debate. We've also found that in life, the chance of a keynote versus a discussion, you will get much more value out of a discussion. So please ask whatever questions you want, because we'd much rather do that. If you want to watch the keynotes, we can send you the YouTube videos. So let's just start off with a quick game. Now, who in the room knows what a unicorn is, or who Robert Wayne is? Someone at the back of the room? Yes?
Unicorn is an animal unicorn. Most of the world.
Could be. So let's play a little game. Let's just imagine we're not at a property event. Let's consider that we are in the 21st century. Let's pretend the rand is back at 13 rand to the dollar. And most importantly, let's pretend that we do believe in collaboration and that technology can solve our problems. So you've got two choices. Please stand up and speak to the person next to you and ask them if they know what a unicorn or Robert Wayne is. Or if you're not prepared to do that, take out your smartphone and Google it. Anyone got any ideas?
Unicorn is mythical.
Unicorn is mythical. In simple terms, a unicorn is a company that goes from $0 to $1 billion in less than 7 years. And Robert Wayne was the third shareholder in Apple. He sold his 10% after about 8 weeks, and today it would be worth $46 billion. So what we'd like to do is share with you in the next 45 minutes some information which could dramatically impact your personal life, your family's life, our country, and our planet. And you really have two choices, whether you want to aim for being a unicorn or aim for Robert Wayne. There's three things that we want to solve today. The first one is the why, the second one is the what, or the how, and the third one is the what. And most people, unfortunately, always start with the what and how, and they don't succeed. Whereas when you get very clear on the why, you will achieve your goal. And so I want to fundamentally explain to you why technology is changing things and why it's going to have an impact on your life. When we look back at the past, let's look at the medieval ages. It was dominated by the church and by the monarchs. And the way they did it was through fear and lack of access to knowledge. Then in 1442, we had the printing press. It allowed the democratization of knowledge. It caused basically the monarchs to fall. It led to the Renaissance. It led to the Industrial Revolution. And to be fair, it led to the democracy in the middle class as we know it today. But it led to another problem. In 1894, they declared humanization and urbanization as we know it over. Why? Because cities were going to drown under horse poo. But we already had the solution. That, for those of you who like Mercedes-Benz, is one of the first Mercedes-Benz in 1886. Now at the time, those cars were built as toys for the super wealthy. They were bespokely built, and they were toys. Does that sound too dissimilar to commercial or international real estate investment today? Henry Ford came along, and he decided to make it accessible to the middle class. And with the Model T in 1910, he literally changed the face of the American landscape, he changed the face of the American economy, and he changed the face of the 20th century. But it led us to the wealth gap. One of the biggest challenges we have on this planet is the difference between the haves and the have-nots. We know that. We experience it in this country more than most. But we also have a personal problem. Someone asked a question just now as we were finishing off, what would you do in the next 10 years? There's a lot of focus on whether you should or shouldn't invest in PE. My question is, surely as global citizens, we should be looking to invest wherever we've got the best opportunities, with the best partners, and the best returns. It's not about where I want to live, it's about where I want my money to live. But the challenge is, how do you do it? How do you solve these grand challenges, both for the planet and for the individual? Well, the internet has done it on so many different fronts. You know, I don't need to explain this to you, but when you look at Apple, Amazon, Uber, EasyJet, eBay, Google, Airbnb, in every single occasion, they've cut out the middleman, they've reduced the costs, they've dramatically increased the efficiency. But what's best is they've increased the accessibility. And the question I ask is, why will it not be the same for real estate or wealth, for you individually? There's three major things that are happening. The first one is there's economic forces. Around the world, we no longer trust our governments, our bosses, our financial planners. Secondly, it's social. It used to all be about being an individual, doing everything on our own. Now it's about collaboration. And lastly, technology is the enabler that is allowing that to happen all over the world. There's been a fundamental shift in old power, the Shermaxes of the world, to be fair, where it was all about one person winning, to new power, where it's all about people working together, about collaboration, effectively copying what we've already learned in nature. Let's look at another example. You've got Britannica, which 20 odd years ago, maybe 30, would have been the only way that you would have been able to get access to knowledge. Your parents would have had to be wealthy enough to buy you a Britannica. Now today we've got Wikipedia. All you need is a cell phone to get access to any knowledge you want. There's two major companies that are taking place and advances both in technology but more importantly in business. And it's the difference between linear and exponential. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I highly, highly, highly recommend you go and buy a book called Bold by Peter Diamandis. Now, if you think you can go into exclusive books here in South Africa and buy this book, you can't. You're going to have to use Kalahari or whatever it's now called. So once again, you're going to have to use technology to get access to the best information and the best opportunities. People don't really understand this. They've been talking about the internet for 20 years, and many would argue it's disappointment, but it's starting to break through in terms of the tipping point. And let me give you two examples. Uber. Now I saw when Dolf asked the question, not too many people knew what Uber was. Does anyone have no idea what Uber is? No? Everyone knows what Uber is. So in simple terms, it's an app that allows you to catch taxis. In the past, you had to phone someone and go through a call center, and they would phone a taxi and you'd get a lift. Now you go through an app all over the world. The taxi service, it started in 2009. Today it's worth $50 billion. It's got something like 476 employees. It doesn't own one car anywhere in the world. It's in 300 different cities and 60 different countries. Let's compare that to Delta Airlines, the oldest and biggest airline in the world. 80,000 employees, started in 1924. It's worth $29 billion, of which $11 billion on balance sheets are purely their aeroplanes. And what's really interesting is that they're in 334 cities and something like 66 countries. Virtually the same, but in a much smaller space of time with much less ownership. So what does this mean to property? Who here in Port Elizabeth uses Airbnb? Anyone? How does it work for you guys? Okay, so I live in Knysna, and we've used the traditional agencies for 2 years to rent out. We've got like a granny flat on our house on Thiessen, and in 2 years we've had one booking. We went on Airbnb literally 2 months ago. My wife now tells me we've had 20 bookings, of which 7 we've turned down because of social proofing, whoever asked about the risk factor. We've had 13 bookings. We booked from now until Christmas, and you live quite close to Knysna, so you'll know that now's not the best time of the year. Am I right or wrong? It's phenomenal. So think about what impact this can have for you as an individual. And that's why Dolf spoke about crowdfunding. And in simple terms, what is crowdfunding? It allows you access to the best opportunities and the best partners worldwide. Whether that's Port Elizabeth or Puerto Rico, it makes no difference. It's not just my idea. It's one of the top 10 trends by 2015 based on all the brands you recognize. And I want to share with you a little video and then I'll call up Hennie because I think this sums it up perfectly. So is anyone here in the banking world? You work in a bank? Okay, so I'm not sure if you work in the credit department for entrepreneurs, but if I came to you and I said, listen, I don't have a huge amount of experience, but I want to do a cool box. And I'm going to launch this cool box. It's a pretty cool box, but I want to get some money before I get started. What do you think the chances of your credit department's giving me money? Eh? Yeah.
That's the sound of a cooler coming down off the shelf. It's the sound of imminent fun. So why haven't cooler designs changed in almost 50 years? Boring coolers are boring, break easily, and are a pain to get to and from your destination. I wanted a cooler that was really well built, yet had so much fun built into it that I would look for excuses to get outside and enjoy it. So, I created the coolest. The coolest is a complete redesign of what a cooler can be. First, you've got this 18-volt rechargeable blender. You don't realize the number of places you could really go for a blended cocktail or smoothie until you've got a blender built right into the lid. You're already carrying around a cooler full of ice and tasty beverages. Why not blend them up and become a summertime hero anytime, anywhere? And what's a party without music? The coolest comes with a removable Bluetooth speaker that connects to any smartphone to wirelessly stream music from up to 30 feet away. It's amazing where speaker technology has come in the last few years. You can skip songs and adjust the volume right from your phone, and this little box can really put out some sound. And since you've got that 18-volt battery for the blender, why not get the most out of it? Maybe your camera battery is low, or maybe you have an iPhone and want to use it after 2 in the afternoon. Recharge your gear work.
Anyone laughing owns an iPhone. So they launched this campaign on Kickstarter, which by the way funded 42% of all startups in America. Oh, would we agree America's a fairly entrepreneurial country? 42% in last year. And look what's really interesting. They had 62,642 people buy cool boxes to a value of $13 million before they'd actually made a cool box. Now what's really, really interesting, put this into the property perspective. Developers at the moment think that an opportunity might be a good one. We were talking about shopping centers. They go out there, they do all the planning, they take all the risk, they go to market, and they basically hope that something's going to happen. Imagine if they could find out from the market what the market really wants before it actually took place. Imagine if the market could participate from the beginning and actually be part of it. What type of impact do you think that would have on real estate? What type of impact do you think it would have on personal wealth? You know, Dolf spoke about the Statue of Liberty. We in South Africa know about Stokvels. We know about the synagogue. They've been around for centuries. But why do they succeed? There's 3 reasons. One is trust. So in the past, you and I would know each other personally, and therefore we'd do business based on our reputation or trust. Am I right or wrong? Now it's about a digital reputation. It's what Dolf spoke about in terms of a social proof. Do you know that when I buy tickets off 7104 Leslie, considering they've done 974 transactions with 100% positive feedback, there's more chance of me getting my tickets than buying from my brother. I'm serious. Because they did.
From a terrible family.
Pardon?
Coming from a terrible family.
But the point being is that they've got a digital reputation. It's more important to them long term. Alibaba, we've all heard about Alibaba. But until Alibaba came along, none of us could buy anything in China. Now you can with third-party verification. You know, the likes of a KPMG being able to go in. The second one is transparency. Most people are so frustrated at the moment with the lack of transparency. But now with technology, you've got it each step of the way. Signing up, looking at the deal, doing the transactions, and ultimately being able to manage your portfolio. And the third one is interest being aligned. You know, Hennie taught me this at a young age. If I'm going to get married to someone and I'm marrying them for their money and they're marrying me for love, what are the chances of it succeeding? Fair enough. What about we get into business? And someone wants to do business with me and I want to do business with them, but basically I see they're going to be hugely successful and I can go and surf all day. And they're going to run the business. Chance of success? So why do we do it in business? Why do we invest our money with the likes of a ShareMax where they're taking 26% of the money on the front end And I'm the investor hoping to make a return on the back end, and I think that it will succeed. Are our interests aligned? Yes or no? So our current system is completely broken, and it's not just here in South Africa. You've got the investor, and yes, you can recognize Neil's face. And they're investing, they're wanting to invest in a quality asset. And Dolf mentioned there's 16 or 17 fees through the process. There's no trust in the system. There's no transparency in the system. And there's higher fees. And I'll get into the details of what Hennie found out many, many years ago. And if people want to argue with me at this, we can look at the results. Of all the people that try and get wealthy, less than 1% actually get wealthy in the Western world. We cannot tell that the system is working. And when we look at the value chain as well, it starts off with land zoning, then it goes to the developer, then it goes to the investor. Often these are the same people, where the developer is also the investor. Then they look to exit to a fund or REIT. That's their payday. Am I right or wrong? And who comes next? You. And we wonder why we don't get wealthy by investing in the same real estate assets that we hear that Donald Trump is investing in. But with technology, we can cut out the middleman and we can allow people to invest straight, exactly like Uber does with taxis. And so I want to finish off and call up Hennie. This is one of my first houses I bought in London in 2002. I was 24 years old. And for me, this is nothing more complicated than them. It was 3 people coming together, 3 people that trusted each other, 3 people that wanted transparency, and 3 people that had their interests aligned. All that we're getting really, really excited about now is that technology is involved and it's an enabler. So without further ado, Hennie and Dolf, if I could ask the 2 of you to come up, please. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's far more valuable for me to ask questions and for you to ask questions and get inside their heads than it is for me just to keynote and present to you. Am I right or wrong? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes? So I want to start off, and before we get into the actual details, you heard the background of Dolf and the very, very acclaimed background. Hennie, would you mind just giving us 2 seconds on who you are, where you come from, and why you're in PE today?
Thank you very much, Scott, for the opportunity. I was born in 1956 in the Free State. I was raised there, and I started my career in business in the early 80s in Gauteng. I've been heavily involved in the healthcare industry in South Africa and involved in property development from about 2006.
So someone asked the question, and I'd like to get into the details of this, because I think, someone said, they were sitting over here, let's look at some opportunities, actual. It's all good and well to talk hypothetically. Let's look at some actual deals. So this particular building behind us here, I actually, in 2009, 2010, had the privilege of traveling overseas with Hennie to Australia. We were trying to buy student accommodation, shopping centers, medical accommodation. The minimum buy-in was about $5 million, so I was the bag carrier. And in 2012, I had the privilege of going with Dolf, actually on one of his buying trips, and going with Neil, actually, and going and looking at different opportunities around America. But most often, we don't get access to the same opportunities with the same quality partners. And this building behind us was actually a building that over a year and a half ago, it was in April that Dolf and myself and Hennie and a number of others were actually walking around looking at. And I wanted to just start off to both of you. I know both of you are very strong on medical. And why medical? And also, why does it just have to be overseas? I mean, Hennie, at the end of the day, you're doing medical locally. Why are you doing it locally and overseas? So medical and also the local versus the offshore.
I think if we can start with the medical, I think medical has got a couple of factors that's very much in its favor. I think one of the important things about medical, the barriers of entry is relatively high. You can't go there and build a hospital or a surgery center or any of those facilities. You need a license, you need permitting. Secondly, you need doctors to participate in the opportunity. You can't do it on your own. And then thirdly, I think, with the aging of the population worldwide, with new technology coming into play, I think, healthcare cost and healthcare treatment improves all the time. And all of that, together gives you a very, very solid investment if you do it in healthcare. My experience over the last 20 years with investment in healthcare in South Africa, I've never had empty space. I've had very, very few doctors leaving my buildings and going somewhere else because they can get it cheaper or whatever reason. And the other reason that's very important, these guys invest heavily, co-invest heavily in your facilities. For instance, if we look at the surgery center, I mean, the cost of the equipment they put in is as much as it cost you to develop the building. Why would they leave? They would basically need to knock down the building to go somewhere else. So you've got a tenant for life if you are in medical. Why overseas? I think for me, I started looking overseas in the early 2000s. Because for me, the world has become a small place. We're part of the global village. And why would I limit myself only to invest in PE or Bloemfontein or Cape Town or Joburg? If the world offers opportunities, lucrative opportunities, great opportunities, we can find out where is the population growth, where is the economic growth. Why would we limit ourselves just to invest in our local market that we know? The world is there for us, and technology enables us to invest wherever the opportunities exist. So that's why I've gone overseas. I think risk diversification, Scott, is one of the big pillars of proper investment planning. So diversify your risk. I think in South Africa we've got two other factors that I think is very important. Our currency is sliding. You've just hit an all-time low, and I think that's not going to stop. So that's the other factor. And lastly, I think for me, yes, we've got a little bit of political risk in Africa that we also need to take into account. So those are the reasons why I went overseas and why I focus on healthcare opportunities worldwide.
Just before I move on to Dolf, how many hospitals are you building in South Africa at the moment?
Well, I'm building 6 at the moment that I'm currently busy constructing, and then I've got a pipeline of quite a number of others that we're developing, and this is in specialized hospitals. That's a new trend we're developing. As everything in the world get more specialized, also healthcare also getting more specialized, and we focus in specialized hospitals, which is basically day hospitals, subacute hospitals, and psychiatric hospitals.
So Dolf, from your experience, could you talk us through, I mean, we know that you've been international for a long time. You've invested on multiple different continents. Talk us through your experience when we were walking around these medical buildings. You know, I think Hennie summed up One Medical. But what was your experience when we were walking around, meeting the partners on the ground, their experience of medical, and just the whole investment committee approach to actually safely looking at opportunities based on everything you've learned and everything that we're talking about?
Well, one of the things I always try to do is to beat the average. And when you look at trying to beat the average in the share market or other markets, I have not yet figured out a way of how to do that. I'll read books on it, but you can go to Las Vegas and read books on how you can beat the average in the casino, how to win at roulette, or how to win at craps. And I don't think there is a way. I think from a mathematical point of view, no matter which strategy you deploy in the casinos, you just have a trade-off between how much you lose versus how long it takes before you lose that amount. You can't defy the odds, and all these books are bogus. So when it comes to the share market, there are theories on how to beat that. In the 1990s, invest in technology stocks, and the technology, or the .com was followed by the .bomb, as they say, it collapsed. And then we had agricultural stocks that collapsed, and look at what's happening in the share market now. When it comes to real estate, there are specific steps you can take to consistently and reliably beat the average, and no one can debunk those things. I'll give you just one example. Hennie's touched on all of these in his comment. I'm tempted to say just ditto what Hennie said. But one way of beating the average in real estate is to find areas where the population growth is higher than average, because there's an extraordinarily strong correlation between population growth and capital value growth of real estate. So if you're in a city that has higher growth than another city, chances are real estate values will go up there. So coming back to this building here, it's in Atlanta. The United States, whether we like it or not, has a population growth. For all the bad things about the States and the people wanting to immigrate, there are more people wanting to immigrate into the States than immigrate out of it. So it's got net population growth. But when it comes to medical, there is a higher usage of medical facilities amongst elderly people than young people. It's just the nature of our physiology. And the population in the States is graying at an alarming rate, I mean a really extraordinarily high rate. It is as well in Europe, not so much so in Asia. Something like 80% of the population of many emerging Asian nations are still below 35. Well, the other trend. So we've got an increasing demand for medical facilities by mere dint of the population's increasing, and by the fact that the proportion of elderly is going up. So when I look around here and I see that that applies in this case for the United States, but Atlanta has got a higher than average growth in the United States. So there's a compounding factor that makes it even more appealing. And then when you look at these buildings, they're not exactly 60 years old and dilapidated, but if we spend $4 million doing it up, it should look good. These are pretty good buildings already. They were largely tenanted. When I say largely, it was, I think, 88% tenanted. Is that good or bad that it's not 100% tenanted?
Good.
It's great, folks, because the fact that it's not 100% tenanted means that maybe the price isn't what it would have been had it been 100% tenanted. So we get it at a discount. So then the question is, can we deploy our collective skills and abilities to find tenants? And we've got 101 ways of attracting tenants to these facilities. By the way, that whole corridor where these buildings are is in a medical area. So people know if you need medical things done, this is the area you go to. So, I mean, we can go on and on about it, ticked all the boxes. We, in fact, have internally 144 points that we want to monitor and check and measure before we decide whether or not to go ahead with the building. And this met the mark on so many fronts. It was just an exquisite building. And then what also gives me confidence is when you're buying for yourself in your own name, you might make a decision on your own, but there's always this niggling question of, am I missing something? When you're with a team of experts, and, you know, we're all experts in a narrow field. So I always say, I know a lot about very few things, and I know almost nothing about most. But when you're with a group of people like Hennie's got far more experience in hospitals. Is that good or bad? For me, when I'm looking at something to do with it, it's good. And so we all enhanced each other. And by having a team, I think there were 7 of us there, when we put our heads together, and everyone agrees that this is a hot deal, basically a great deal, it just gives you confidence that you're onto the right track. So we have checks and balances in place.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate on that, and because I want to come back to that question as to what's the difference between crowdfunding, syndication, you know, funds, REITs, and basically risk. You know, when you look back at this building, it was actually two things that were very, very memorable for me. Firstly, sitting around negotiating with the seller, I learned more about commercial property in those 2 hours than I've ever learned in my life. Because between Dolf, Hennie, and Alan Kynock, they really were grilling these Americans like they'd never seen before. But I mean, little things like TI, tenant installation, they had all these fancy brochures that Dolf spoke about earlier, and how any seller can put something nice together. But they were asking questions, and they managed to take $1 million off the purchase price in less than 5 minutes, because they knew what the actual cost of tenant installation was, not just the perceived cost of tenant installation. And that, just as my interest, do you think that $1 million was passed on every single cent to the investor, yes or no?
Yes.
It was. You know, this wasn't where it was bought for $10 million and then ultimately brought back to South Africa and sold to a bunch of unsuspecting people at $16 million. Does that make sense? In terms of the actual direct costs, in terms of where it was. What was really interesting from a transparency perspective is that money was actually raised on 5 different continents with a minimum investment of $50,000. So it allowed people to participate, but every person that participated was treated in exactly the same way. And something that I showed the people in Cape Town, which is not quite the same for you guys in PE, but I'd like to just share it with you. Sorry, not Cape Town, Johannesburg, because I haven't been in Cape Town yet. But also just looking at actuals. You know, I think a lot of people can talk a big story, but rather than look at that, just look back at track record. And a year ago, you know, we were involved with Neil and Erwin, and we were talking about some of the deals that we were currently doing on the ground. And I decided a year later, let's just look at the actuals. And if you look at the Rand, we're very wrong because we did this calculation only 10 days ago. And the Rand was at 12.77 then. But if we had invested $100,000 just on Rand, because a year ago it was at 10.67, just by the way. Then the extension of the building, which Dolf hasn't even spoken about, there was a value add. There were 2 ways the value add we did. One is the building was 88 or 89% occupied. We had it filled up before we actually bought it. And secondly, we had a tenant that wanted to be able to extend, and based on just current cap rates, that added more value. And then cap rates have also devalued, and that's actually very conservative because it's gone, we've said they're 7.25 to 6.5. I know, Hennie, just from your recent trip, those are looking even more aggressively at 5.5, to 6. So I mean, just in simple terms, as a South African, action, no action was about a 40% swing over a 12-month period. And again, this is not hope or maybe it's actuals. But I think also what I wanted to discuss quickly in terms of, Hennie, the feedback we had in Johannesburg and Durban was sometimes it sounds like it's getting too complicated. So take us a few steps back just in terms of your experience. Firstly, you've mentioned investing offshore, but I'd like to know some of the mistakes and lessons that you've learned. And then also tell us your experience of actually analyzing the likes of ShareMax and other partners when you were trying to invest overseas and what works for you.
Thank you, Scott. I think I've started to try to invest overseas in, as I said, just after 2000. And I've learned a couple of lessons, and I can spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to just do the point and name the things that I think is very important. The first and almost a very important thing is you need to have a local partner. It's impossible for anybody to be an expert all over the world. And we know property, this side of the street is good, this neighborhood is good, and the other ones are not. So you need to have a local, very strong, reliable, trustworthy partner. And that's not always easy to find. So that for me is the first thing. Secondly, you need to understand the judiciary of that country. I've tried to do business in the Middle East and we failed because the judiciary and the language is a huge problem. I relied on a translator and that it was just not good enough. Eventually the thing didn't work out because we were not on the same page in terms of the actual deal structure. So that for me is very important, and therefore I've decided only to look at countries like Australia, America and the UK. We understand the language, the judiciary is similar, and we can talk the same language. Yes, the terminology might differ, but that you can pick up. So the partner, those two other things I think for me is very, very important. Obviously funding is another issue that you need to take into account. Non-recourse funding is not always easy to get. The structuring and obviously, the security you have in the laws and the constitution of that particular country, I think is very, very important as well. So for me, that is the main thing. If I look at ShareMax, I went to ShareMax when they were still in business, tried to do a deal with them and asked them and tried to see whether they can raise money for us for international investors. When I look at the structure, I immediately decide to walk away from that meeting and not to do business with them. Why? Because they were taking the interest of them, of their group, and the investor wasn't aligned. They took, as Scott mentioned, 27% or 26% up front. So now I take 100 Rand for you, I take 27% off, and I buy a property for the balance. So that business is basically insolvent, technically insolvent from day one. And that's why I walked away. So for me, the most important part of the whole thing, the interest should be aligned. If I work for the investor, firstly, I need to put my Rand next to the Rand on the same terms and conditions. Secondly, there should be absolute transparency in terms of the deal. And thirdly, you need to have technology that can ensure that transparency is there and that you can see the deal. No funny structures, simple, straightforward business where everybody is treated the same. And the last principle, which is fundamental for me, is that there's no fees that I take money and in management fees. Our view is that if we make a profit at the end, we all share in the profit. If there's no profit, nobody gets a benefit out of that. And that's driving our thinking, and that's, I think, differentiate our approach from the likes of ShareMax.
Dolf, from your perspective, in terms of having traveled all over the world and looked at different opportunities, where are the opportunities in the world? Obviously you've been traveling a huge amount in the last 12 months. Hennie's been traveling a huge amount in the last 12 months. And for people that are living in PE, I'm sure that they are interested, rightly or wrongly, just what your opinion is as to where the opportunities are globally, and equally, Hennie, based on your experience. But Dolf, you first in terms of what's happening.
Gosh, that is a complex question because there are so many factors that come into account. Let me give you an example. If we talk about security, I am blown away. This is the only country I know of where you not only have 6-foot-high fences, but then electrified wiring. I think electrified wiring is illegal in many other countries on the basis that someone foolishly goes and climbs a wall to make it electrocuted. That's not right, so they make it illegal. Here it's allowed, so security is very low. Let's go to a country where security is very high, Japan. How many have been to Japan, just as a show of hands? All right, well then you know what I'm talking about. It's very clean there, it's very safe. I was once waiting on a subway, I left a camera and a pile of money, paper money, on the seat beside me because the train came in and everyone was rushing, and I rushed in, I was nearly home, and I thought, oh gosh, I left my camera and money there. So I went back to the station the next morning, went to the station master. I said, has anyone by chance handed in a camera? And he said, oh, follow me. I said, I can show you, tell you what it's like, you know it's me. And he took me to the very bench where I was sitting the night before. The camera was still there and the pile of money was still there. You probably don't believe that or understand it, how is that possible in this world? So on that basis you might say, well, let's invest in Japan. But Japan currently has a population of just short of 130 million. It's expected that within one generation it will shrink to below 100 million. So is that good for getting rid of pollution? Yes. Is it good for getting rid of congestion on roads? Yes. Is it good for growth and capital value of real estate? No. It's shrinking. So I wouldn't invest in. So you need a mix of places that are sufficiently safe to meet your needs, where you've got good population growth, good capital growth, where there are innovative ideas. So it's a combination. As Hennie was saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You've got to spread around. Right now, as you heard Dr. Kees Bruggeman say this morning, the economy in the States is doing remarkably well. Even though cap rates have come down a lot, which is another way of saying prices are starting to move up, the economy is in full recovery mode, there are still tremendous opportunities there and good prospects that the economy will do well. But it's not the only place. There are pockets of Europe where they're doing very well too. They're a bit behind in the cycle, they're coming up, but you've got to be careful of taxes. France is one of my favorite countries. I'm a staunch and ardent Francophile. But their taxes are very high, so you've got to find deals sufficiently good that they counter that. New Zealand, not because I come from there, but New Zealand has got some great opportunities. There's no death tax, inheritance tax, or estate tax there. Capital gains tax does not exist. It's not on the statutes. That's pretty exciting. The top marginal tax rate is 33%. So you've got to look at a combination of security, growth, relatively low taxation, ease of getting your money in and out, free flow of information, true capitalistic ideals, currencies not pegged, but nor are other things, no restrictions on taking the money out. And then when you identify that one place, still don't put all your eggs in that place. Spread it around a bit. And don't sweat it too much, folks. In 100 years from now, it won't matter to any of us. Chances are, right? Unless there's some medical breakthrough. We go to Hennie's new suite of hospitals to have cryogenic preservation of our brains and new bodies and all that. And if that's possible, I want to choose the body I end up in next. But anyway, you know, just do something. Often taking action and learning from the mistake of taking that action is better than taking no action and in 10 years' time saying, if only I'd listened to myself.
So we're taking the high level, in terms of all the different areas that Dolf's speaking of. That's the big problem people have. I mean, that's why I, tried to write a book and, with Clem Santa on a whole modeling system. But we actually put everything that we've got together in what we call GIDS, which is the Global Investment Due Diligence System. And it goes right from the start to, which countries to look at, which subsectors to look at, which markets to look at, and then literally the amount of research done, which properties to look at, which partners, tax structure and compliance, right through to management and maintenance. But Hennie's the one in our team that's out there on the front line, going to Australia, going to America. Once we've decided certain countries, certain sectors, certain cities, and I mean, I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mind just sharing what you recently found when you were in Australia, and then equally when you were in America.
Yeah, I think as far as Australia is concerned, I think the market in Australia is a little bit overvalued, a little bit concerned about that, in terms especially of the commercial, retail, and the industrial. But there's still an opportunity as far as residential is concerned. And they've got a very interesting policy in the cities in Australia, which they call densification, because they realize that to sprawl the cities, to make them bigger and bigger, costs a lot of money in terms of infrastructure and to maintain that infrastructure. So I find a very exciting opportunity in Australia regarding sort of densification. That means more dense, residential developments in existing suburbs. So that's a very interesting play in Australia. As far as America.
Do you mind if I just butt in 2 seconds there? Hennie's a very humble gentleman. I just wanted to point out that they started in 2009, and that company is now on the Australian Stock Exchange with a market cap of about 200 million Aussie dollars. So just if you want to understand the difference between a one-off home builder and someone who's been there. Sorry.
Okay, as far as America is concerned, I think the American market, there was great opportunities, and there's still great opportunities, but the market has moved. You know, when I arrived there the first time about 4 years ago, I will never forget this in my life. I was on the steps of a courthouse in one of the counties, and I think Neil was there as well, where they were selling 7,000 houses in only Atlanta on that Tuesday. 7,000 on auction. And it was chaos. But I could buy a house that day for between $7,000 and $25,000. Those same houses now, I didn't have the courage, so I was too scared. I mean, I didn't understand the market, and it was too much for me on that particular day. But that market has come back. Those same houses you can now get, if you're lucky, for $150,000. And you can imagine what happened to the guys that had the courage with me at the same buyer's trip to buy those houses. I did a brief calculation, they've made 800%. But that's now history. It just shows you, you know, we must be aware and awake to find these opportunities where they exist. The market has come back. I think the residential is almost back to normal market values. I think in the healthcare industry, we look at a specific niche market, and we still find opportunities. Where we could do deals a year ago for 7.5%, 8%, 8.5% cap, we can't find them any longer. And it's not going to be long before we will not be able to buy existing buildings, because I can't buy, nobody can buy, and I will never advise people to buy at cap rates of 5 and 5.5. You're not going to make money on those things. But we will have them to start to develop. And there's still opportunity, because with the growing economy, with more people, I think there's still great opportunities in terms of healthcare to develop. And we've got a full sort of list of places we want to go, with licenses, they call it in America permitting, where they've got permits to build medical facilities. There's also some opportunities now with the growing economy and in the commercial and retail market, but you know that we haven't investigated into that into too much detail. But so the migrant market has come back, still opportunities in terms of development.
Just tell us a little bit, I know, Dolf, you looked at a lot of this as well, but you know, specifically, Hennie, you are on the ground now with this whole EB5, and I mean, all around the world, all of us are looking at different passports. Dolf lives in 6 different countries, and just the philosophy with regards to not only kind of wanting to get an offshore passport, but also just some of the pros and cons from your perspective as to why you registered the EB5. Now, just from your last trip you got back 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think America has got a couple of sort of ways and means that you can get a green card and be able to work there. And I think just as a philosophy, you know, as a principal approach to this, you know, my family has been living in South Africa since 1658. In 14 generations. I love this country. I never want to go anywhere else. But I also realize that, you know, I need to have a plan B or a second option if you want to work there, if you want to participate in the opportunities the world has to offer. And therefore I looked into the American situation, on what basis can you get a green card. And there's 2 that basically interest me, and I think it might interest other South Africans. The one is the EB5 program, where you invest $500,000 into a project. All of the providers of these projects need to register with the government and the receiver of revenue, so they officially the people that are sort of approved to provide the service. And then with that, obviously you can get a green card, you can work in America, you can come and go. The only condition is you need to stay there for at least 6 months of 180 days a year. And the other implication is you are taxed on your worldwide income. So that's also something that you need to consider carefully before you take a decision. The other option is obviously the L/1A one, where you can get a green card by starting a branch or a subsidiary of your business that you're doing here, start that in America. There you don't need to stay any specific period in America. You get a green card and you can go and do as you wish. But you need to have an office there, you need to employ people, and you need to present a proper business plan of what you intend to do in America. That's 2 of the ones that I found very interesting on my latest trip, and one that I would like to invest in or to start to get my own green card, not because I want to leave the country, but because I want to make use of the opportunities the world has to offer. And in property in America, as Dolf has indicated, is very, from a property perspective, it's a great country to invest in. I'm not sure, Scott, whether I answered this question.
No, well, it's a long, it's going to take 4 hours basically, because it's obviously very in depth. But I mean, look, for people who are interested, there is some stuff where they can literally just look and understand some of the opportunities that we currently are looking at and investigating. I think the most important thing when people understand crowdfunding, it might sound complicated. Forget about the word crowdfunding. Just think of it as technology, think of it as the internet, and all that it's doing, whether it's in Port Elizabeth or London or Sydney or New York, it's allowing you the same access to the best opportunities and the best partners. That's it. You know, and I think that's, just from the two of you, I just wanted to ask your closing thoughts, and then I think it's time for us to learn from her.
Yeah, thank you, Dolf. Just the last couple of comments from my side. I think, one of the lessons I've learned is, if you go overseas, find partners and people that you can work with. And just some of the sort of the features of the deals that we're doing currently. What are the challenges that face you when you go overseas and want to invest in? Firstly, you need to find the property. And I think that we've done now, we've got partners, and we do it for ourselves. This whole business was started because we want to invest overseas. So we've got the partners, we've got the deals, and I could give you a lot more deeper on that. The second challenge that face you is, how do I get funding for this? Because you're not allowed to do recourse funding. You need to get non-recourse funding. So then the second step that we had to solve was to find a sponsor that can get the funding for us, sign security, the security or the surety for that. That was the second. So that's sorted. So we've got projects now. We've got funding, no recourse. The third thing is, what happens if there's a shortfall? And one of the principles that we firmly believe in, we don't want people to be involved in a deal. We want people to be committed. And therefore, the deal and the agreement that we've got with these product providers, if there's a capital call of any nature, whatever their shareholding, they need to pay 1/3 at least of the capital call. So if they don't have a tenant, because they also manage the building, they need to pay 30% or 1/3 of any capital call in future. Do you think they'll look after the building? Do you think they make sure there's tenants in that building? We can't do it from here 17,000 kilometers away. So we've got the deal. They committed to the deal. So those deals exist. They're there, they're real, and I think in general, Scott, just to close off with, we're looking for deals where we can get the return cash on cash from about 8% to 12% as a spread. We're looking at deals where the cap rate or your IRR over a 5-year period is about 15%. And that, in a hard currency, I think is not bad. And all our projects, it's a 5-year investment period. After 5 years, we exit, you get your money, and then you can decide whether you want to stay in or leave. All the deals we're doing is 10-year leases, and in some cases, we always, or in all the cases, we look at some sort of angle, uplift. As Dolf mentioned, the building is, we put them together in portfolios, 5 to 7 to 12 to 10 buildings. 7 of them are fully tenanted, the others we've got the 80% and we know we can fill them up. And that gives you immediately a little bit of a lift in terms of your return. Or it's a redevelopment play. Or we know we can replace this one with another guy. For instance, our partner in Atlanta is in the healthcare business there for decades, not for years, for decades. I mean, I'm talking about from 1968. Do you think it's a good partner to have? Do you think you understand the players in the healthcare industry? Do you think you can find us a partner? Yes. So that is the people, and that is the system that we can help you with, and come, and you're welcome to co-invest with us in those opportunities.
Cool. Thank you very much. Dolf, anything from your side before we...
Just some closing remarks. We live in democratic societies. Democracy has some major problems. I think you're seeing evidence of that. However, I still think democracy is better than any alternative. In a similar vein, capitalism has a lot of challenges. I still prefer it to the alternative. One of the challenges with capitalism is it tends to be competitive. We're in competition with each other. For you to make $1, you have to deprive me of $1, and for me to make $1, I have to deprive you of $1. And there's this new school of thought that instead of competitive capitalism, we can have collaborative capitalism. Let's join forces. And it took me decades to figure this out. For the first 40 years of my life, and I am over that, but for the first 40 years, I thought that since I could do a lot of things better than anyone else, I should do it on my own. And since then, I realized that working together as a team, you can actually achieve a lot more and go further than if you do try and do it all yourself. And that's where this crowdfunding comes into. You know, I've done a right in real estate, Hennie's doing brilliantly, Scott's doing a right. But as a team, is it not possible that by collaborating we can create something where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? And you can participate in that. In other words, you don't need to go through the learning curve that we went through. They say experience is the best teacher. And it's not. Experience of itself is useless. It's only applied experience that's useful. So by joining forces with a team of people who know more than you do, you can go a lot further. We always say, if you're the smartest person on your team's in trouble. So join forces with others. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you.